Have you ever woken up from a dream so vivid, so strange, that you couldn't shake the feeling it meant something more? Maybe you dreamed of a deceased loved one giving you advice. Or perhaps you saw yourself flying over landscapes that felt more real than your waking life. Well, thousands of years ago, our ancestors didn't just wonder about these nocturnal visions. They were absolutely convinced that dreams were direct communications from the divine realm. Tonight, we're diving deep into the ancient world's most fascinating belief system. We're going to explore why civilizations across the globe, from the ziggurats of Mesopotamia to the temples of Egypt, from the oracle caves of Greece to the sacred mountains of Peru, all shared this unshakable conviction that when we close our eyes at night, the gods open a channel directly to our souls. What we'll discover isn't just a collection of quaint superstitions. These beliefs shaped empires, launched wars, built monuments that still stand today, and influenced decisions that altered the course of human history. Kings refused to march into battle without consulting their dream interpreters. Priests spent decades learning to decode the symbolic language they believed the gods spoke in sleep. Entire temples were constructed based on architectural plans that came to builders in dreams. But here's what makes this story truly incredible. These weren't isolated beliefs held by a few mystics in remote corners of the world. This was the dominant understanding of dreams across virtually every ancient civilization we know of. And the evidence suggests they took these divine messages more seriously than we take our most important emails today. So settle in, because we're about to journey back to a time when the boundary between the physical and spiritual worlds dissolved every single night, and when the most powerful people on earth hung on every symbol, every character, every strange narrative that played out behind their closed eyelids. The story begins in ancient Mesopotamia, in the Fertile Crescent where writing itself was born. Here, on clay tablets that archaeologists still uncover today, we find some of humanity's earliest recorded dreams. But these weren't personal diary entries about confusing nighttime visions. These were official state documents, carefully preserved records of divine communications that guided the decisions of kings and shaped the fate of entire civilizations. The Mesopotamians developed what might be the world's first systematic approach to dream interpretation. They believed that dreams came in two distinct categories. There were ordinary dreams, which they thought were simply the mind's way of processing daily experiences. But then there were the significant dreams, the ones that carried the weight of divine revelation. These special dreams had unmistakable characteristics. They were unusually vivid, filled with symbolic imagery, and often featured divine beings speaking directly to the dreamer. What's fascinating is how seriously the political establishment took these nocturnal messages. The Epic of Gilgamesh, one of humanity's oldest surviving works of literature, is essentially built around a series of prophetic dreams. Gilgamesh receives warnings about his future through dreams, and his companion Enkidu dreams of the underworld before his death. These weren't just literary devices. They reflected the genuine belief that dreams provided glimpses into destiny itself. But the Mesopotamians didn't just passively receive these divine messages. They developed an entire professional class dedicated to interpreting them. Dream interpreters known as sha'ilu held positions of tremendous influence in royal courts. These weren't fortune tellers working out of market stalls. They were highly educated scholars who studied for years to master the complex symbolic language they believed the gods used to communicate with mortals. The interpreters worked from detailed reference texts that cataloged thousands of dream symbols and their meanings. If a king dreamed of a lion, it might signify coming victory in battle. A dream of flowing water could indicate prosperity for the kingdom, but the interpretation wasn't simply a matter of looking up symbols in a divine dictionary. The skilled interpreter had to consider the dreamer's social position, the current political situation, the time of year, and dozens of other factors that might influence how the gods chose to communicate. Moving west to ancient Egypt, we encounter an even more elaborate relationship between dreams and divine communication. The Egyptians believed that during sleep, the soul temporarily separated from the body and traveled to the realm of the gods. This wasn't a metaphorical journey. They understood it as a literal physical process where the spiritual essence of a person could receive direct instruction from divine beings. Egyptian dream interpretation reached such sophisticated levels that they produced what might be history's first dream dictionary. The Chester Beatty Papyrus, dating back over 3,000 years, contains detailed interpretations for hundreds of different dream scenarios. But unlike modern dream analysis, which tends to focus on psychological symbolism, the Egyptian system was entirely concerned with predicting future events and understanding divine will. The pharaohs, who were considered living gods themselves, placed enormous importance on their dreams. Royal dreams were treated as state secrets, carefully recorded by scribes and analyzed by teams of priest interpreters. The interpretation of a single royal dream could determine whether Egypt went to war, how resources were allocated, or which building projects received priority. One of the most famous examples involves Thutmose IV, who as a young prince fell asleep between the paws of the Great Sphinx. In his dream, the Sphinx spoke to him directly, promising that if he cleared away the sand that had accumulated around the monument, he would become pharaoh. Thutmose followed the dream's instructions, and indeed, he eventually ascended to the throne. This story was considered so significant that he had it carved in stone on a stele that still stands between the Sphinx's paws today. But the Egyptians took dream communication even further. They developed techniques for what we might call induced dreaming. People seeking divine guidance would sleep in temple complexes, following specific rituals designed to make them more receptive to divine messages. They would fast, purify themselves through ritual baths, and sleep on special beds within the sacred precincts, all in hopes of receiving a dream that would answer their prayers or solve their problems. The practice became so popular that temples developed entire economies around dream incubation. Pilgrims would travel hundreds of miles to sleep in the most sacred locations, paying substantial fees for the privilege of potentially receiving divine communication. Temple priests would guide them through the preparatory rituals and then interpret any dreams that resulted. What makes all of this even more remarkable is that these beliefs weren't confined to the ruling classes or religious establishments. Ordinary people throughout the ancient world shared this conviction that dreams carried messages from the gods. Farmers consulted dream interpreters before planting crops. Merchants sought divine guidance through dreams before embarking on dangerous trading expeditions. Families made major decisions based on the symbolic content of nocturnal visions. The ancient Greeks would take these beliefs to even greater heights, developing philosophical frameworks that attempted to explain exactly how divine communication through dreams actually worked. In ancient Greece, dream interpretation evolved from a practical art into a sophisticated science. The Greeks didn't just accept that gods communicated through dreams. They wanted to understand the mechanics of how these divine messages actually traveled from the realm of the immortals into human consciousness. Aristotle himself wrestled with the phenomenon, proposing that while most dreams were simply the mind processing daily experiences, some carried genuine prophetic power. He suggested that during sleep, when the rational mind was quiet, humans became more sensitive to subtle divine influences that surrounded them constantly, but were normally drowned out by waking consciousness. But it was in the temples of Asclepius, the god of healing, that Greek dream practice reached its most refined form. These weren't just places of worship. They were essentially ancient hospitals where the primary treatment method was receiving healing instructions through dreams. Patients would undergo elaborate purification rituals, make offerings to the god, and then sleep in sacred chambers called abaton, waiting for Asclepius to appear in their dreams with specific medical advice. The process was so systematic that it resembled a modern clinical trial. Temple priests kept detailed records of patients' conditions, their dreams, the treatments prescribed through those dreams, and the outcomes. Thousands of these case studies were preserved on stone tablets, creating what might be history's first medical database. And remarkably, the success rates were apparently high enough that these healing temples operated continuously for over 1,000 years. The most famous of these dream healing centers was located at Epidaurus, where the ruins still attract visitors today. Archaeological evidence shows that this complex could accommodate hundreds of patients at once, with elaborate dormitories designed specifically for sacred sleep. The temple employed teams of specialized priests who had trained for decades in the art of interpreting medical dreams and translating divine instructions into practical treatments. What's particularly striking about the Greek approach is how they distinguished between different types of divine dreams. They recognized that not every unusual dream carried a message from the gods. True divine communication, they believed, had specific characteristics. The imagery was typically clear and symbolic rather than chaotic. Divine beings often appeared directly to the dreamer, and most importantly, the dreams provided actionable information that could be verified in the waking world. This last point reveals something crucial about ancient dream beliefs. These weren't vague, unfalsifiable claims about spiritual experiences. The gods, according to ancient understanding, provided specific testable information through dreams. They warned of coming disasters that could be prepared for. They revealed the locations of hidden treasures that could be found and claimed. They prescribed medical treatments that either worked or didn't. In the ancient mind, dreams weren't just spiritual experiences. They were practical tools for navigating a dangerous and unpredictable world. The Romans inherited these Greek traditions but adapted them to their own cultural needs. Roman dream interpretation became heavily focused on political and military applications. Roman generals regularly consulted dream interpreters before major battles. Political leaders sought divine guidance through dreams before making important decisions. And the Roman state itself maintained official dream interpreters who advised on matters of national importance. One of the most documented examples involves Julius Caesar, who reportedly received multiple warning dreams before his assassination. According to historical accounts, Caesar's wife Calpurnia experienced a vivid nightmare the night before the Ides of March, dreaming that she held Caesar's bloody corpse in her arms. She begged him not to go to the Senate that day, but Caesar dismissed the warning. The story became legendary precisely because it confirmed what Romans already believed. The gods had tried to save Caesar through a dream, but he had foolishly ignored their message. Roman dream practices also became more democratized than their Greek predecessors. While the Greeks focused heavily on temple-based dream incubation, Romans developed techniques that ordinary people could use in their own homes. Roman dream manuals provided detailed instructions for preparing oneself to receive divine messages, including specific prayers, dietary restrictions, and sleeping positions that supposedly made divine communication more likely. But perhaps nowhere were dreams taken more seriously than in the ancient Americas. Among the Maya, dreams weren't just messages from the gods. They were considered alternate realities where the dreamer's soul could travel through time and space, gathering information about past and future events. Maya rulers underwent elaborate dream quests as part of their royal training, learning to navigate these spiritual realms and return with knowledge that would guide their kingdoms. The Maya developed a complex calendar system that included auspicious times for dream seeking. They believed certain astronomical alignments made divine communication more likely, and they scheduled important dream sessions to coincide with these celestial events. Maya priests who specialized in dream interpretation held positions equivalent to modern-day intelligence advisors, providing crucial information about enemy movements, weather patterns, and optimal times for planting and harvesting. Similar beliefs flourished among the Inca, who considered dreams to be direct communications from their ancestors and the powerful spirits that controlled natural forces. Inca rulers regularly made major policy decisions based on dreams, and the empire maintained an extensive network of dream interpreters who reported their findings to the central government in Cuzco. What becomes clear when we examine these diverse cultures is that ancient people weren't simply more superstitious than we are today. They had developed sophisticated systems for understanding and utilizing what they genuinely believed was a reliable source of information about the future. These weren't primitive attempts to understand psychology. They were practical technologies for survival in a world where accurate information could mean the difference between life and death, prosperity and starvation, victory and defeat in war. The consistency of these beliefs across cultures that had no contact with each other suggests something profound about human experience itself. Whether we're looking at Mesopotamian ziggurats or Maya temples, Egyptian papyri or Roman military manuals, The same basic understanding emerges. During sleep, the boundary between human consciousness and divine wisdom becomes permeable, allowing mortals to receive guidance from powers far greater than themselves. So what does all of this tell us about our ancestors and perhaps about ourselves? When we trace this golden thread of belief across thousands of years and countless civilizations, we find something remarkable. These ancient people weren't naive dreamers clinging to primitive superstitions. They were sophisticated thinkers who developed complex systems for understanding what they genuinely experienced as divine communication. Their dream interpretation methods were as rigorous as any modern scientific protocol. They kept detailed records, tracked outcomes, refined their techniques based on results. They created professional institutions that lasted for centuries, built enormous temples dedicated to dream practices, and shaped the course of human history based on nocturnal visions they trusted more than their own waking thoughts. Maybe the real question isn't why ancient people believed dreams were messages from the gods. Maybe the question is when and why we stopped believing it. In our rush to embrace scientific materialism, we've perhaps lost something profound about the human experience. We've turned dreams into mere neurological noise, random firing of synapses clearing out the day's mental debris. But the next time you wake from a dream that feels too vivid, too meaningful, too perfectly timed to be mere coincidence, remember that for most of human history, the wisest people who ever lived would have told you to pay very close attention indeed. They might have been onto something we've forgotten in our modern certainty that the material world is all there is. The gods, it seems, have been trying to reach us through our dreams for as long as humans have been sleeping. The only question is whether we're still listening.